The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt, kicking up dust that swirled like ghosts in the late afternoon light. Eleanor Mitchell clutched her weathered carpet bag, knuckles white with anxiety. This was supposed to be the beginning of her new life, not another painful rejection. But as the townsfolk gathered, their whispers cutting through the mountain air like knives, she knew something had gone terribly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The man who promised to meet her, to marry her, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, cruel laughter rippled through the crowd as someone muttered, "Too old to be a bride. What man would want her now?" Little did they know that just beyond the edge of town, a broken man named Noah Parker was about to make a choice that would change both their lives forever. The mountain wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, a mournful sound that matched the emptiness in Noah Parker's chest. 3 years had passed since they'd laid Rebecca in the cold ground, and still the wound felt fresh. He stood at the window of his ranch house, watching as the first snowflakes of the season drifted down from a steel-gray sky. Whispering Pines Ranch had once been the pride of the territory, but now the fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, and the cattle herd had dwindled to less than half its former glory. "Pa?" Ethan's small voice pulled Noah from his brooding thoughts. The 9-year-old boy stood in the doorway, his 2 small boots caked with mud from the corrals. "Frank's here, says there's trouble in town." Noah sighed heavily, running a calloused hand through his dark hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. "What kind of trouble?" "Don't know. He just said you ought to come quick." Noah limped across the room, his left leg stiff from the logging accident that had nearly taken his life 5 years back. He'd been lucky, the doctor said, lucky to keep the leg, lucky to still be able to work the ranch. But some days, like today, with the cold seeping into his bones, luck felt a lot. Like punishment. Frank Wilson waited outside, his massive blacksmith's frame hunched against the cold. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he paced the yard, clearly agitated. "What's got you riding all the way out here in this weather?" Noah asked, reaching for his coat. Frank's expression was grim. "Stage came in, brought a woman, mail order, bride for Peterson." Noah frowned. "Anderson Peterson? The one who left for California last month?" "The very same," Frank nodded. "Seems he forgot to mention to his intended that he wouldn't be meeting her. Now she's stranded, and Caldwell's lot are making a spectacle of her in the town square." A flash of anger sparked in Noah's chest. Victor Caldwell and his cronies were always quick to find entertainment in others' misfortunes. "What's it to me?" he asked, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. "She needs help, Noah. The women won't go near her, afraid of what folks might say. The men—" Frank trailed off, his expression darkening. "Well, they're either laughing or looking at her like wolves eyeing a wounded deer." Noah glanced back at the house, at Ethan hovering in the doorway. The boy had already lost so much. The last thing Noah needed was to involve himself in the town's drama, to give Caldwell another reason to come after his land. "Please, Pa," Ethan said quietly. "Ma would have helped." The words hit Noah like a physical blow. Rebecca would have helped. Without hesitation, without question. It was one of the countless things he had loved about her. "Ah, fine," Noah muttered, grabbing his hat and pulling it low over his eyes. "But I'm just going to see what can be done. Nothing more." The ride into Pine Ridge took longer than usual, the impending storm slowing their progress. By the time they reached the town limits, fat snowflakes were falling steadily, turning the dirt streets to mud. Noah could hear the commotion before he saw it, raucous laughter and jeering voices carrying on the wind. The town square was crowded despite the weather. At the center of the gathering stood a woman, tall and straight-backed despite the humiliation, being heaped upon her. She wore a plain traveling dress, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that did little to soften her features. She wasn't young, closer to 40 than 20, and her face bore the lines of someone who had weathered hardship. At her feet sat 2 worn trunks and a smaller valise, the sum total of her worldly possessions. Noah recognized Victor Caldwell, standing closest to her, his expensive coat and polished boots marking him as different from the miners and farmers who made up most of Pine Ridge's population. "Come now, Miss Mitchell," Caldwell was saying, his voice carrying the false sympathy that Noah had learned to despise. "Surely you understand. A woman of your maturity shouldn't expect to find a husband so easily. Peterson likely took one look at your daguerreotype and ran for the hills." Fresh laughter erupted from the crowd. Noah saw the woman flinch almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "My arrangement with Mr. Peterson was clear. I answered his advertisement honestly and completely." "Well, he's gone," Caldwell replied with exaggerated patience, "and Pine Ridge has no use for spinsters without prospects. The stage returns east tomorrow. I suggest you be on it." Noah dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud as he pushed through the crowd. Frank followed close behind, his presence enough to make several onlookers step aside. "That's enough, Caldwell," Noah said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Of the crowd, the lady deserves better than to be made a spectacle." Caldwell turned, his surprise quickly masked by a smirk. "Well, well, Noah Parker, emerging from his hermitage at last. Come to rescue another lost cause. Your ranch not falling apart quickly enough for you." Noah ignored the barb, turning instead to the woman. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a deep amber, intelligent and wary. "Miss Mitchell, is it? I'm Noah Parker. This is a poor welcome to Pine Ridge. Let me help you find proper accommodations until you decide your next steps." She studied him carefully, clearly weighing her limited options. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Parker, but I have no means to pay for lodging. It seems Mr. Peterson has left me in quite a predicament." "The boarding house has a room," Frank offered. "Mrs. Turner owes me a favor." Caldwell stepped closer, his voice dropping so only Noah could hear. "Careful, Parker. Taking in strays might give people ideas, especially strays too old and plain. To find a proper place, though I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they?" Noah's hand curled into a fist, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting into a fight with the richest man in the territory would solve nothing. "Mrs. Turner's boarding house is full up," called Mrs. Gentry from the edge of the crowd. The general store owner's pinched face held no sympathy. "And I won't have her kind staying above my shop, bringing down the tone." "Her kind?" Noah echoed, anger rising in his chest. "And what kind is that exactly?" "The desperate kind," someone muttered, triggering another round of snickers. Miss Mitchell's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she kept her dignity. "Please don't trouble yourself. Mr. Parker, I'll find a solution." Noah looked at her standing there in the falling snow, her belongings at her feet, her future uncertain. He thought of Rebecca, of how she had always believed in helping those in need. He thought of Ethan, watching and learning what kind of man his father was. "You'll stay with us," he said firmly, surprising himself as much as anyone, "at Whispering Pines until you decide what you want to do next." The crowd fell silent, shocked by this unexpected development. Even Caldwell seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "I couldn't possibly impose," Miss Mitchell began, but Noah cut her off with a shake of his head. "It's not an imposition. We have the room." He nodded to Frank, who moved to pick up one of her trunks. "And it's about to storm something fierce. No one should be out in that." "How charitable," Caldwell recovered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Though I wonder what your dear departed Rebecca would think of you bringing a strange woman into your home. What example does that set for your boy?" Noah stepped close to Caldwell, close enough to smell the expensive cologne the man favored. "Don't you ever speak her name," he said quietly. Rebecca would have been the first to offer help, and you know it." He turned back to Miss Mitchell, whose expression had softened slightly. "The offer stands, ma'am. No expectations, no obligations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Just shelter from the storm." She hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I accept your kindness, though I insist on working to earn my keep." "Fair enough," Noah agreed, helping Frank load her trunks onto his wagon. He offered his hand to help her climb up, noticing the strength in her grip as she took it. This was no delicate flower, but a woman accustomed to work and hardship. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Lawson finally made his appearance, too late. "To be of any real help, everything all right here, Parker?" "Just fine, Sheriff," Noah replied coldly, "though you might have asked that question before the lady was subjected to public ridicule." The sheriff had the grace to look embarrassed. "Just doing my job, making sure there's no trouble." "The only trouble is allowing good people to be treated poorly," Noah replied. "But then we all know who pays your salary." He didn't wait for a response, instead climbing up beside Miss Mitchell and taking the reins. As they pulled away from the town square, he could feel Caldwell's eyes burning into his back, and he knew this small act of defiance would have consequences. The wealthy rancher had been looking for reasons to force Noah off his land for years, and now Noah had handed him fresh ammunition. Ethan had stayed with the horses, and his eyes widened when he saw Miss Mitchell. "Who's she, Pa?" he asked with a child's directness. "This is Miss Mitchell," Noah replied. "She'll be staying with us for a time. Miss Mitchell, this is my son, Ethan." "Pleased to meet you, Ethan," she said, her voice warming as she addressed the boy. "And please, both of you may call me Eleanor, or Ellie if you prefer." Ethan studied her with unabashed curiosity. "Why were they being mean to you in town?" "Ethan," Noah admonished, but Eleanor shook her head. "It's all right," she said. "Sometimes, Ethan, people can be unkind when they encounter something or someone that doesn't fit their expectations. I came here expecting to be a bride, but the man I was to marry is gone. That makes some people uncomfortable." Ethan considered this. "That's stupid," he declared finally. "It's not your fault he left." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips, the first Noah had seen from her. "No, it's not. Thank you for understanding that." The snow was falling more heavily now, the wind picking up as they left the relative shelter of the town and headed into open country. Eleanor pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to hide her shivering. Without a word, Noah shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it across her lap. When she began to protest, he shook his head. "I'm used to the cold," he said simply, "and we've still got a ways to go." The journey back to Whispering Pines passed largely in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Noah couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. It had been just him and Ethan for so long now, their routine established, their grief a familiar companion. Bringing a stranger into their home, a woman no less, would disrupt everything. But as he glanced at Eleanor, her profile strong against the snowy backdrop, he felt something stir within him, not desire exactly, but recognition. Here was someone who understood hardship, who knew what it meant to stand alone against the world's cruelty. Perhaps, in offering her shelter, he was acknowledging a kinship that transcended conventional propriety. The ranch came into view as they crested the final hill, a collection of weathered buildings nestled in a valley protected by towering pines. It wasn't much to look at these days, but it was home. As the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house, Noah saw Eleanor, taking it all in, her expression carefully neutral. "It's not much," he said gruffly, "but it's dry and warm. It's more than I expected to have tonight," she replied quietly. and far better than I deserve from strangers." Noah helped her down from the wagon, momentarily aware of the firmness of her waist beneath his hands. "We're not doing you any special favors, Miss Mitchell. Anyone with a decent bone in their body would have done the same." "Ellie," she corrected gently. "And no, Mr. Parker, they wouldn't have. I saw that clearly enough today." As they stepped onto the porch, Ethan rushing ahead to open the door, Noah realized she was right. In offering help when no one else would, he had set them both on a path that would surely lead to more trouble. Caldwell wouldn't let this go, and the town's gossip would only grow more vicious. Yet watching her step across his threshold, her head held high despite everything she had endured today, Noah couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. For the first time in 3 long years, Whispering Pines felt a little less empty, a little less haunted by what had been lost. Eleanor paused just inside the door, taking in the sparse but clean main room with its stone fireplace and simple furnishings. Her eyes lingered on the small portrait on the mantel. Rebecca, holding a toddler Ethan, her smile radiant. "Your wife was beautiful," she said softly. Noah nodded, the familiar ache in his chest both expected and bearable. Yes, she was, inside and out. "I'm sorry for your loss," Eleanor said, and unlike the hollow condolences he'd heard too many times before, her words carried the weight of genuine understanding. "Pa says I look like her," Ethan piped up, breaking the somber moment, "but I got his stubborn streak." This drew a genuine laugh from Eleanor, the sound surprising them all with its warmth. "I have no doubt about that, young man, no doubt at all." Outside, the storm intensified, snow swirling against the windows like restless spirits. But inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Noah watched as Ethan eagerly showed Eleanor to the small guest room that had stood empty for too long, the boy's animation a stark contrast to his usual quiet demeanor. Perhaps he had made a mistake today. Perhaps there would be consequences he wasn't prepared to face. But as the wind howled and the snow fell, Noah Parker allowed himself a moment of peace in the knowledge that, for tonight at least, they had all found safe harbor against the storm. And in the morning, they would face whatever came next together. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Eleanor woke to unfamiliar sounds, a rooster crowing, the low lowing of cattle in the distance, and the clatter of pots in what she presumed was the kitchen. For a moment she lay still, taking in the small room with its faded quilt and simple furnishings. The events of yesterday crashed back into her consciousness, bringing with them a wave of uncertainty. What was she to do now? She had spent nearly every penny she had on the train ticket west, believing Anderson Peterson's promises of a good life, a partnership based on mutual need rather than romantic notions. At 38, Eleanor had long ago accepted that conventional marriage was unlikely for her. She was too outspoken, too independent, and, as the townsfolk had so cruelly pointed out, too old for most men's tastes. Peterson's advertisement had seemed a godsend. A widower with a ranch, looking not for beauty or youth but competence and character. But Peterson was gone, and Eleanor was stranded in a hostile town, dependent on the charity of a man who clearly had troubles enough of his own. She smoothed her travel-wrinkled dress as best she could and pinned her hair into a simple bun before venturing out into the main room of the cabin. Ethan sat at the table, spooning porridge into his mouth while watching her with undisguised curiosity. There was no sign of Noah. "Good morning," Eleanor said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Your father." "Out checking the fences," Ethan replied. "Storm knocked some down. He said to tell you there's food on the stove and to make yourself at home." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the instruction. "Have you eaten enough?" she asked, noting the boy's thin frame. Ethan shrugged. "Pa says I'm growing too fast for our supplies." The implications of that simple statement told Eleanor more about the Parkers' situation than any lengthy explanation could have. Moving to the stove, she found a pot of porridge, plain and unsweetened, but hot. She served herself a modest portion, not wanting to seem greedy. "Do you help your father with the ranch work?" she asked, sitting across from Ethan. The boy nodded, pride evident in the straightening of his shoulders. "I take care of the horses mostly. Pa says I have a way with them." "That's a valuable skill," Eleanor said, meaning it. "I had a knack with horses myself growing up. My father bred them back. In Kentucky." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Pa won't let me break the new ones yet. Says I'm too small." "Your father's right to be cautious," Eleanor said. "But there's more to working with horses than just breaking them. Gaining their trust, understanding their moods. Those things are just as important." They fell into an easy conversation about horses, Ethan's initial wariness melting away as he realized she actually knew what she was talking about. It was the longest interaction Eleanor had enjoyed since leaving St. Louis, and she found herself smiling despite the uncertainty of her situation. After breakfast, she insisted on washing the dishes and putting the kitchen in order. The cabin was clean but Spartan, showing the signs of a household managed by a man with more pressing concerns than domestic comfort. Eleanor found herself cataloging small improvements that could be made: curtains for the bare windows, cushions for the hard wooden chairs, herbs that could be grown to flavor the bland food. But such thoughts were presumptuous. She was a temporary. Yes, nothing more. Her priority had to be figuring out her next steps. With no money for a ticket east and no prospects in Pine Ridge, her options were distressingly limited. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Noah Parker, his cheeks ruddy from exertion and the chill. He stopped short at the sight of her standing by his hearth, as if he'd momentarily forgotten her presence in his home. "Miss Mitchell," he said with a nod, "I trust you slept well enough?" "Very well, thank you," she replied. "And please, call me Eleanor, or Ellie, if you prefer. After your kindness, formality seems unnecessary." He seemed to consider this before nodding again. "Ellie, then. The storm took down some fencing on the north slope. I fixed what I could, but there's more to be done." "I'd be happy to help," she offered immediately. Noah's eyebrows rose. "Fence mending is hard work." "I'm no stranger to hard work, Mr. Parker, and as I said yesterday, I insist on earning my keep while I'm here." A hint of respect flickered in his eyes. "Very well, but I'll need to ride into town first, see about getting more supplies. The storm did more damage than I expected." Ellie felt a flutter of anxiety at the mention of town. "I understand. I'll stay here and see to things around the house." "Actually," Noah said slowly, "I thought you might come along. After yesterday, folks will talk regardless. Better to face them head on than hide away." She wanted to refuse, to avoid facing the humiliation of the previous day, but there was wisdom in Noah's words. Hiding would only fuel the gossip. "You're right," she conceded. "When do we leave?" "Soon as Ethan's ready. He can help load the supplies while we're there." The ride into town was tense, the beauty of the snow-covered landscape doing little to ease Ellie's apprehension. She had borrowed one of Noah's coats, the sleeves too long, but the warmth welcome. Ethan chattered happily between them on the wagon seat, seemingly oblivious to the adult's discomfort. Pine Ridge looked different in the clear light of day, smaller somehow, less intimidating. The main street was busy with people clearing snow from boardwalks and checking for storm damage. Heads turned as Noah guided the wagon toward the general store, whispers following in their wake. "Ignore them," Noah said quietly, his voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." Ellie straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. "Nor have you, Mr. Parker." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Noah, if I'm to call you Ellie, fair's fair." Inside Gentry's general store, the hushed conversations stopped abruptly as they entered. Mrs. Gentry herself stood behind the counter, her pinched face souring further at the sight of them. "Mr. Parker," she said stiffly, "what can I help you with today? Nails about £5, some fence wire if you've got it. Coffee, flour, sugar, and whatever meat you've got that's not too dear." Noah's voice was matter-of-fact, giving no indication that he noticed the stares directed their way. As Mrs. Gentry gathered the items, Ellie busied herself examining bolts of fabric, mentally calculating what she could make with the small amount of money she had managed to keep aside. A simple dress for everyday wear would be practical, though. She'd need to be frugal with the yardage. "Planning on staying long, are you?" Mrs. Gentry asked, her tone making the innocent question sound like an accusation. Before Ellie could respond, Noah spoke from behind her. "Miss Mitchell will be staying at Whispering Pines until she decides her next steps. Not that it's anyone's business but hers." Mrs. Gentry sniffed. "Just making conversation. Though I'd think a man in your position would be more careful about appearances, what with your boy and all." Noah's expression hardened. "My son is being raised to judge people by their character, not by gossip. You might consider the same approach." The storekeeper's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing more as she finished gathering their supplies. Ellie selected the plainest, most serviceable fabric, a sturdy brown cotton, and a packet of needles, adding them to Noah's purchases despite his protest. "I insist," she said quietly. "I need proper clothes for ranch work, and I won't add to your expenses." He studied her for a moment before nodding, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. They were loading the supplies into the wagon when Victor Caldwell appeared, two of his ranch hands flanking him like guards. Ethan tensed instantly, moving closer to his father's side. "Parker!" Caldwell called, his voice carrying down the street. "That heard about your fence trouble. Shame about that." Noah's face remained impassive. "Nothing that can't be fixed." Of course," Caldwell smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Though repairs are costly, and I hear the bank's been asking about your mortgage payments. Hardly seems worth the effort when I'm prepared to offer a fair price for the whole property." "Not interested," Noah replied shortly, helping Ellie onto the wagon seat. Caldwell's gaze shifted to her, his smile turning predatory. "Miss Mitchell, isn't it? Settling in at Whispering Pines? How cozy." Ellie met his stare evenly. "Mr. Parker and his son have been most hospitable." "I'm sure they have. Such a shame about your intended. Though between us, I think you had a lucky escape. Peterson was never what you'd call reliable, or particularly discerning." The insult was thinly veiled, but Ellie refused to rise to the bait. "I find that those who speak ill of others often reveal more about themselves than those they criticize." Caldwell's smile faltered slightly. "Spirited as well as mature. Interesting combination." Noah finished securing their supplies and climbed onto the wagon. "We'll be on our way now, Caldwell. I'm sure you have better things to do than harass my guest." "Just being neighborly," Caldwell replied, stepping back from the wagon. "Oh, and Parker, those strays that have been troubling your cattle. Sheriff says they're getting bolder. Might want to keep a close watch. Wolves get desperate in winter." The threat was clear in his tone, and Ellie saw Noah's hands tighten on the reins, but he simply nodded and set the wagon in motion, leaving Caldwell standing in the street behind them. "That man is dangerous," Ellie said quietly once they were clear of the town. Noah's expression was grim. "Caldwell's had his eye on Whispering Pines for years. The valley has the best water access in the region, and with the railroad coming through next year, the land value will only increase." "Why does he need more land? From what I saw, he seems wealthy enough already." "It's not about need," Noah replied. "It's about power. Caldwell wants to control the entire valley, and my ranch sits right in the middle of his grand plans." Ethan, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "He hurt Major last summer. "My horse," he explained to Ellie. "Cut him bad along the flank. When he broke into our stable, Pa says it was a warning." Noah shot his son a sharp look. "We don't know that for certain, Ethan." "Don't we?" The boy's voice held a maturity beyond his years. "He wants us gone, Pa. Everyone knows it." The rest of the journey passed in thoughtful silence. Ellie's mind raced with this new information. She'd encountered men like Caldwell before, men who confused wealth with worth, who believed their desires trumped others' rights. Such men were dangerous indeed, especially when thwarted. By the time they reached Whispering Pines, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. Noah immediately set to unloading the supplies, instructing Ethan to take care of the horses. "I'll start on supper," Ellie offered, carrying the foodstuffs toward the house. "You don't have to," Noah began. "I want to," she interrupted firmly. "It's the least I can do." Inside the cabin, Ellie took stock of the meager pantry. The supplies they'd purchased would help, but it was clear that the Parkers had been living on the edge of want for some time. Still, she could work with what they had. During the war, she'd learned to stretch rations and make palatable meals. From next to nothing, by the time Noah and Ethan came in from the barn, she had a pot of stew simmering on the stove, the rich aroma filling the small cabin. She'd found a few withered vegetables in the root cellar and combined them with a small portion of the salt pork from town, stretching the meal with dumplings made from the fresh flour. "Smells good," Ethan said appreciatively, hanging his coat by the door. "Like when Ma used to cook." An awkward silence followed his words. Noah's face tightened, and Ethan looked stricken, as if he'd committed some terrible faux pas. "Your mother must have been an excellent cook," Ellie said gently, breaking the tension. "Perhaps you could. Tell me what dishes she made that you enjoyed most, for future reference." Ethan glanced at his father uncertainly. "She made a fine apple pie," Noah said after a moment, his voice gruff but not angry, "when we had the apples for it." "And flapjacks with honey," Ethan added cautiously, "on Sundays sometimes." "Flapjacks I can manage," Ellie smiled, "though I've never claimed to be much of a baker." "Neither was Rebecca at first," Noah said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The first pie she made for me was hard as a rock. We nearly broke a tooth trying to eat it." Ethan giggled, the sound bright in the cozy kitchen. "She got better. Though, right, Pa? She did indeed. Your mother was determined that way, never gave up until she mastered whatever she set her mind to." The tension eased as they sat down to eat, Noah and Ethan sharing small anecdotes about Rebecca that seemed to comfort rather than pain them. Ellie listened, offering gentle questions that kept the conversation flowing. It struck her that perhaps they hadn't spoken of Rebecca this way in a long time, remembering the joy rather than just the loss. After supper, Noah insisted on helping with the washing up, while Ethan worked on his lessons. The boy's education had been patchy at best, Ellie gathered, with the local schoolhouse too far for regular attendance during the worst of the winter months. "I could help with his studies," she offered as she and Noah stood side by side at the wash basin. "I taught school for several years back east." Noah's hands stilled momentarily. "You're a school teacher." "Was," she corrected. "Before. The war changed everything. Afterward, teaching positions were scarce, and men returning from battle were given preference." "So you decided to answer an advertisement for a wife instead?" The question could have sounded judgmental, but Noah's tone held only curiosity. Ellie sighed, her hands busy with the dishes. "I had few options. My parents died in '62, typhoid. The family home went to my brother, and when he was killed at Gettysburg, his wife sold everything and moved west with her new husband. I'd been staying with my cousin, but when she passed last year," she trailed off, the familiar ache of loss tightening her throat. "You were alone," Noah finished for her, understanding in his voice. "Yes." with dwindling funds and diminishing prospects. Peterson's advertisement seemed practical. He wanted a partner, not a pretty young thing to warm his bed. His letters were respectful, intelligent. I thought, she shook her head. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca and I knew each other since childhood, he said finally. Married young, built this place together from nothing. After she died, I couldn't imagine ever. He stopped, as if the words were too difficult to form. You don't have to explain, Ellie said softly. No, but I want you to understand. When I offered you shelter, it wasn't with any expectations beyond helping someone in need. I'm not looking for... Neither am I, she assured him quickly. I appreciate your kindness, and I'll work hard to earn my keep for as long as I'm here, but I harbor no illusions about my situation. Relief flickered across Noah's face, followed quickly by something that might have been regret. Good. That's good then. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, the awkwardness of their conversation fading into a tentative understanding. Later, as Ellie prepared for bed in the small guest room, she heard Noah and Ethan talking softly in the main room. The boys' laughter drifted through the door, a bright, hopeful sound that made her smile despite the uncertainty of her future. Whatever came next, she was grateful for this temporary respite, this brief belonging. It had been a long time since anyone had stood up for her as Noah had today. A long time since she'd felt anything but alone in the world. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this weathered cabin with its grieving inhabitants, Eleanor Mitchell allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as natural as the turning of the earth. Ellie rose each morning before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast before Noah and Ethan emerged from their rooms. The men would eat quickly, then head out to tend to the cattle and horses while Ellie tackled the domestic tasks that had clearly been neglected for too long. She swept and scrubbed, mended and organized, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. With the fabric she'd purchased in town, she sewed herself a simple work dress and began repairs on Ethan's threadbare clothes. The boy was growing fast, and most of his garments were either too small or worn through at the knees and elbows. In the afternoons, she often joined Noah in the more physical work of the ranch, helping to repair fences, mucking out stalls, or sorting through supplies in the barn. At first he had protested, insisting that such labor wasn't suitable for her, but Ellie had simply rolled up her sleeves and picked up a hammer, her capable hands quickly proving that she was no delicate flower to be coddled. Where did you learn to swing a hammer like that? Noah asked on the third day, watching as she efficiently secured a loose board on the chicken coop. Ellie smiled, driving in another nail with practiced ease. My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons. Never know when you might need to fend for yourself, he used to say. Then the war came, and most of the men went off to fight. Those of us left behind had to manage everything: farms, businesses, homes. You either learned to do what needed doing, or you went without. Noah nodded, a new respect in his gaze. Rebecca was the same way, could shoot straighter than most men, ride harder, work longer. Never complained, even when things were at their worst. She sounds remarkable, Ellie said sincerely. She was. The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was complex. Grief tinged with pride, and a deep, abiding love that time had not diminished. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, Ellie would work with Ethan on his studies. The boy was bright, but had fallen behind in his reading and arithmetic. She developed simple lessons tailored to his interests, using stories about horses and ranching to engage his attention. Noah would sit by the fire, ostensibly mending tack or reviewing his accounts. But Ellie often caught him listening to their lessons, sometimes offering a comment or question that showed he was following along. One night, about a week after her arrival, Ellie found a small journal among the few books on the cabin's shelf. The pages were filled with poetry, some copied from famous works, others clearly original compositions in a delicate feminine hand. "Rebecca's," Noah said from behind her, making her start. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. She loved poetry, used to read it aloud on winter nights like this. Ellie carefully closed the journal. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right." Noah moved into the room, taking the journal from her hands with gentle fingers. She would have liked that someone was reading her words again. They've been silent too long. "She wrote beautifully," Ellie said. "There was one about the mountains in spring that reminded me of Wordsworth." Noah's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know Wordsworth?" "I told you I was a teacher." She smiled. "English literature was my particular passion." He hesitated, then held out the journal. "You should read them, Rebecca's poems. She would have wanted them to be appreciated." The gesture was small but significant, a piece of his past, of Rebecca, entrusted to her care. Ellie accepted the journal with the reverence it deserved. "Thank you. I'll treasure them." Later that night, alone in her room, Ellie read Rebecca's Poetry by Lamplight, the lyrical words painting vivid pictures of the life she had shared with Noah. The beauty of the mountains in different seasons, the joy of watching Ethan grow, the deep love she felt for her husband, all were captured in verse both simple and profound. The later entries spoke of illness, of fear, but never without hope or gratitude for the life she had lived. The final poem, dated just weeks before her death, was addressed directly to Noah. "When I am gone, my love, do not let grief become a prison where you lock away the joy we found in each too fleeting day. Our time, though brief, was full beyond belief. Remember me in sunlight, not in tears, in laughter shared, in dreams we dared pursue. And know that I would wish new hope for you, new love to light the darkness of your years. For Ethan's sake, and yes, my love, for yours, do not let sorrow be our legacy. The heart expands with love, it never shrinks. There's room enough for memory and more. I leave you with this truth I've come to see. The greatest gift is love that never ends." Tears blurred Ellie's vision as she closed the journal. Rebecca Parker had been an extraordinary woman, brave, loving, and wise beyond her years. The depth of Noah's loss was suddenly, painfully clear. How could anyone ever fill the void left by such a profound love? And yet, Rebecca's own words suggested she had wanted Noah to find happiness again, to open his heart once more for his sake and for Ethan's. The knowledge brought Ellie both comfort and confusion. She had not come to Pine Ridge looking for love, had not expected anything beyond the practical partnership Peterson had proposed. And certainly, she had no right to imagine that Noah Parker might ever see her as anything more than a temporary guest in his home. Still, as the wind whispered around the eaves of the cabin and the fire burned low in the hearth, Eleanor Mitchell allowed herself to acknowledge the quiet truth that had been growing in her heart. She was coming to care deeply for this grieving man and his son, not because she sought to replace Rebecca or claim what had been hers, but because Noah's quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, and his gentle care for Ethan had awakened something she had long thought dormant within her: the capacity to love deeply, completely, despite the risk of loss. It was a dangerous realization, one she would need to guard carefully. For now, she was grateful simply to be here, to be useful, to be part of this small family's healing journey, however temporarily. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations. For tonight, it was enough to hold Rebecca's words close to her heart, a blessing from beyond the grave that she had neither sought nor expected. Outside, the howl of wolves echoed through the valley, a reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the cabin's walls. But inside, warmed by the fire and the tentative bonds of friendship forming between them, Ellie felt safer than she had in years. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage that had brought her this far. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would not have to face it alone. The first significant snowfall came in early December, blanketing Whispering Pines in pristine white that gleamed like diamond dust in the morning sun. Ellie stood on the porch, coffee mug warming her hands, and watched as Noah and Ethan trudged through knee-deep drifts toward the barn. In the month since her arrival, the ranch had transformed. Not just physically, with repaired fences and a reorganized barn, but in less tangible ways. Laughter came more easily to Ethan now, and occasionally she caught Noah watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter uncomfortably in her chest. She had no illusions about her situation. Her place here was temporary, a fortunate harbor in the storm of her life. Yet, with each passing day, the thought of leaving grew more painful. She had grown attached to this remote mountain homestead with its wild beauty and harsh challenges. More dangerously, she had grown attached to its inhabitants. The solemn boy who now sought her out to share his small triumphs, and the grieving man whose rare smiles felt like precious gifts. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her reverie. A rider approached through the snow, the horse moving at a careful trot along the barely visible trail. As the figure drew closer, Ellie recognized Frank Wilson, Noah's friend from town. His expression was grim, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. "Morning, Miss Mitchell," he called, reining his horse to a stop. "Noah around?" "In the barn," she replied, setting down her coffee. "Is something wrong?" Frank dismounted with a grunt. "News from town. Best if Noah hears it directly." Concern tightened Ellie's chest as she hurried to the barn, Frank following. In her wake, inside, the air was warmer, filled with the familiar sense of hay and livestock. Noah looked up from where he was mending a saddle, his expression shifting from welcome to wariness as he noted Frank's presence. "Frank wasn't expecting you in this weather." "Wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." Frank removed his hat, twisting it in his large hands. "Sheriff posted a notice yesterday. County's setting up a land auction for properties with delinquent taxes. Whispering Pines is on the list." Noah's face hardened, the muscles in his jaw working. "That's impossible. I paid those taxes in September. That's what I told Lawson. He claims they never received the payment." "I have the receipt," Noah said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Gave it to Lawson myself." Frank looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff says receipts can be forged. Says you'll need to produce the cancelled bank draft to prove payment." Ellie watched the color drain from Noah's face. "The bank draft that would have been returned to me by the county treasurer. The very same," Frank nodded grimly. "Convenient, isn't it, that the proof you need is something the county should have sent you?" "Caldwell!" Noah spat the name like a curse. "He's behind this. Must have paid someone at the county office to claim they never received my payment." "Most likely," Frank agreed, "but proving it will be next to impossible." "When's the auction?" Ellie asked, speaking for the first time. 2 weeks from Saturday, right before Christmas." Noah's laugh was bitter. "Merry Christmas to the Parkers, homeless for the holidays." "You said you have the receipt," Ellie pointed out. "Surely that counts for something." "Not if Lawson's in Caldwell's pocket," Frank replied, "and we all know he is." Noah stood abruptly, pacing the length of the barn with barely contained fury. "How much?" he demanded. "How much do they claim I owe?" Frank named a sum that made Ellie's heart sink. It was far more than the Parkers could possibly raise in 2 weeks, especially with winter limiting their ability to sell cattle or take on additional work. "There must be something we can do," she said, her mind racing through options. "Could you appeal to the circuit judge?" "Judge won't be through these parts until spring," Frank replied. "By then, it'll be too late." Noah stopped pacing, his expression resolute. "I'll ride to the county seat. Speak to the tax office directly. Show them my receipt. Maybe there's someone there who hasn't been bought by Caldwell." "That's a 3-day ride in good weather," Frank pointed out. "In this snow, could take twice as long, and no guarantee anyone will listen when you get there." "I have to try." Noah's voice was firm. "I won't let Caldwell steal what's mine without a fight." Ellie stepped forward. "I'll go with you." Both men turned to her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Noah said immediately. "It's too dangerous in this weather." "Two voices are more persuasive than one," she argued, "and I've testified before county officials before, during the war. I know how to make bureaucrats listen." "And what about Ethan?" Noah countered. "I can't leave him alone for over a week." "I'll stay with the boy," Frank offered. "Betty won't mind. She's always had a soft spot for Ethan." Noah looked torn, clearly wanting to refuse Ellie's offer, but seeing the logic in her argument. "The journey will be hard," he said finally. "Cold, long hours in the saddle, rough accommodations." Ellie met his gaze steadily. "I've endured worse. And this ranch means as much to me as it does to you." The words slipped out before she could consider their implications, and she rushed to clarify. "That is, I've come to care about what happens to you and Ethan. I want to help." Something flickered in Noah's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. After a long moment, he nodded. "We'll leave tomorrow at first light. Best tell Ethan and make preparations." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Ellie baked extra bread for Ethan and Frank to have while they were gone and packed provisions for the journey. Noah cleaned and oiled his rifle, checked and rechecked the horse's tack, and went over the ranch routines with Frank in meticulous detail. Ethan took the news of their impending departure better than expected, though Ellie noticed how he shadowed his father for the remainder of the day, as if memorizing his presence. The boy had already lost so much. The fear of losing more was etched in his solemn eyes. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Ellie found Noah standing on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. The mountains were silver ghosts in the moonlight, beautiful and indifferent to human struggles. "He'll be fine with Frank," she said softly, joining him at the railing. "Frank seems like a good man." "The best," Noah agreed. "Saved my life once, during a rock slide. Never asked for anything in return except friendship. Those are the friends worth having." Noah turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why are you doing this, Ellie? Risking this journey with me? You could stay here, safe and warm, or make your way to the next town, start fresh somewhere else." The question caught her off guard, though she'd been asking herself the same thing all day. "I told you, I want to help." "But why?" he pressed. "You owe us nothing, less than nothing, considering how unwelcoming this place has been to you." Ellie took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. "Because for the first time in years, I feel useful, needed, like I'm part of something that matters." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And because you and Ethan have become important to me. More important than I expected or intended." Noah was silent for so long that Ellie began to regret her honesty. But when he finally spoke, his voice held a warmth that eased her embarrassment. "You've been a blessing to us, Ellie. More than you know." Ethan smiles again. "The house feels," he searched for the right word, "alive, like it used to be before Rebecca died." "I'm not trying to replace her," Ellie said quickly. "I know that." Noah's hand closed over hers where it rested on the railing, his touch gentle but firm. "And I'm not looking to replace what we had. Couldn't if I tried, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something different. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, delicate and profound. Ellie's heart thundered in her chest, hope and fear tangling in her throat. Before she could respond, Noah withdrew his hand and stepped back. We should get some rest. Long journey ahead tomorrow. With that, he turned and went inside, leaving Ellie alone on the porch with the moon and the mountains and the echo of words that promised something she had long since stopped hoping for. They set out at dawn, the eastern sky barely touched with pale light as they rode away from whispering pines. Ethan stood on the porch with Frank, waving, until they disappeared around the bend in the trail. Ellie felt the boy's absence like a physical ache, surprising herself with the depth of her attachment to him. The journey was every bit as difficult as Noah had warned. The snow made travel slow and treacherous, the mountain trails barely visible beneath the white blanket. They rode in silence most of the day, conserving energy and focusing on the path ahead. By nightfall, they had covered less than half the distance Noah had hoped for. They made camp in a small clearing sheltered by pines, the horses tethered nearby. Noah built a fire, while Ellie prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The routine felt oddly domestic, as if they had done this countless times before. "Storm coming," Noah said, as they sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. "Can smell it in the air." Ellie looked up at the sky, where stars glittered between dark patches of clouds. How bad? Hard to say, but we'll need to find better shelter tomorrow night if it hits. He studied her across the fire. "How are you holding up? Not too sore?" She smiled wryly. "I'll feel it tomorrow, I'm sure, but I've ridden harder trails than this. In Kentucky, and during the war, I volunteered as a nurse with the Union forces, followed the troops from battlefield to battlefield. Spent more time in the saddle than out of it for nearly 2 years." Noah's eyebrows rose. "A nurse? You've never mentioned that before." Ellie shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "It's not something I like to dwell on. I saw terrible things that haunt me still." "I can imagine." His voice was soft with understanding. "My brother fought at Shiloh, came back a different man, hollow-eyed, jumpy, drank himself to death within a year." "I'm sorry," Ellie said, meaning it. "So many never recovered from what they experienced. The wounds we could see were often the least of their suffering." "Is that why you became a teacher afterward, to escape those memories?" She considered the question. "Partly, but I'd been a teacher before the war as well. There's something healing about helping young minds grow, about creating order from chaos, knowledge from ignorance." "You're good with Ethan," Noah observed. "He's learned more from you in a month than he did all last year with me trying to teach him. You've had other priorities, keeping the ranch running, keeping food on the table." She smiled gently. "Besides, it's often easier for children to learn from someone who isn't their parent. Less emotional complication." They fell into a comfortable silence, the crackling of the fire and the soft nickering of the horses the only sounds in the wilderness. After a while, Noah spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "What will you do, Ellie, if we can't save the ranch?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on helping the Parkers keep their home that she hadn't considered the alternative. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I'd try to find work as a teacher somewhere, or a nurse, if necessary." "You could come with us," Noah said quietly, "wherever we end up. Ethan would be devastated if you left." "And you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Noah met her gaze across the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "I'd be devastated too." The simple honesty of his response stole her breath. Before she could formulate a reply, Noah stood and moved to check on the horses, the moment broken but not forgotten. They slept on opposite sides of the fire, wrapped in blankets against the biting cold. Ellie lay awake long after Noah's breathing, had deepened into sleep, his words echoing in her mind. Devastated, the admission was both beautiful and terrifying, a glimpse of a possible future she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine. Morning brought leaden skies and a bitter wind that cut through their heavy coats. They broke camp quickly, eating cold biscuits in the saddle as they pushed on. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, light and innocuous at first, then thicker and faster as the wind intensified. "We need to find shelter," Noah called over the rising howl of the storm. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead. Used it during cattle drives years back." Ellie nodded, pulling her scarf higher over her face as they urged their tired horses forward. The world had narrowed to a swirling white tunnel, landmarks obliterated by the blizzard. She trusted Noah's knowledge of the terrain, but fear clawed at her throat as the visibility decreased to mere feet ahead. The line shack appeared suddenly through the curtain of snow, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Noah dismounted quickly, leading his horse to a lean-to attached to one side of the cabin. Ellie followed suit, her fingers numb with cold, as she helped him secure the animals and provide them with feed from the meager supplies stored in the shelter. Inside, the cabin was Spartan but sound, the roof and walls intact against the storm. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a narrow cot stood in the corner, its thin mattress dusty from disuse. Noah immediately set about building a fire while Ellie explored their temporary haven. "Not much here," she said, opening the single cupboard to find a few tins of beans and coffee, a dented pot, and 2 cracked mugs. "But we won't starve, or freeze," Noah added as the fire caught, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. "Which is the greater concern at the moment?" Ellie removed her snow-crusted coat and hung it near the fire to dry. Her dress beneath was damp at the hem, and she shivered despite the growing warmth in the cabin. Noah noticed, frowning with concern. "You should change into something dry. I'll step outside." "And freeze yourself? Don't be ridiculous." She smiled to soften her words. "I'll manage. The fire will dry me quickly enough." But as the day wore on and the storm intensified, the dampness of her clothes seemed to seep into her bones. Despite the fire's warmth, she couldn't stop shivering. By evening, her teeth were chattering audibly, and her attempts to hide her discomfort were failing miserably. "This is absurd," Noah said finally, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "You're going to make yourself ill. I have a spare shirt in my pack. It's dry and large enough to cover you decently. Please change before you catch your death." Too cold to argue, Ellie accepted the offered garment, a soft flannel shirt worn thin with washing. Noah turned his back, busying himself with the fire, while she quickly stripped off her damp dress and donned the shirt. It fell to mid-thigh, preserving her modesty while allowing her to spread her dress near the fire to dry properly. "Better?" Noah asked, still facing away from her. "Much, thank you." She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders for additional warmth and propriety. "You can turn around now." When he did, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his shirt, hair loose around her shoulders, cheeks flushed from the fire's heat. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of awareness that made her suddenly conscious of their isolation, their proximity, the intimacy of sharing this small space. Noah cleared his throat, turning to the cupboard. "We should eat. Keep our strength up. Storm might last through tomorrow." They shared a simple meal of beans heated over the fire, supplemented with the last of the bread Ellie had packed. The howling wind made conversation difficult, driving them into a companionable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional shifting of the logs. As night fell, the question of sleeping arrangements loomed unspoken between them. There was only the one narrow cot, barely wide enough for a single person. "You take the bed," Noah said firmly. "I'll sleep by the fire." "The floor is cold and hard," Ellie protested. "Your leg will pain you terribly by morning." He shrugged. I've slept in worse conditions. As have I. She considered the small cabin, the dwindling firewood, the fierce cold pressing against the walls. We could share the blankets by the fire for warmth. Noah's expression was unreadable in the flickering light. That wouldn't be proper. Propriety seems a luxury we can ill afford in a blizzard, Ellie pointed out pragmatically. But if you're concerned for my reputation, I assure you it's already beyond salvaging. Living unchaperoned in your home for a month has seen to that. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Your reputation isn't the only consideration. Then, what is? She challenged gently. Noah's gaze met hers, direct and unflinching. My control, being near you, affects me in ways I didn't expect, ways I wasn't prepared for. The honest admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Ellie's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. I trust you, Noah, completely. Perhaps you shouldn't. His voice was rough with emotion. Because you might care for me? She took a step closer to him, emboldened by the storm raging outside and the warmth building between them. Is that such a terrible thing? It is if I can't provide for you. If I lose the ranch, then we'll face that together, she interrupted. If you'll have me. Noah's expression softened, vulnerability replacing caution. I've been alone so long, Ellie, grieving, struggling. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again, like there might be a future worth fighting for beyond just survival. I know. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek tentatively. I felt the same way until I came to Whispering Pines, until I met you and Ethan. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face. I'm not an easy man, Ellie. I'm stubborn and proud and scarred by loss. And I'm not a young girl. With stars in her eyes, she replied with a small smile. I'm a woman who knows exactly what she wants and what she's willing to fight for. Noah's other hand came up to cradle her face, his touch reverent. And what is it you want, Eleanor Mitchell? A home, she whispered. A family. You. The last word had barely left her lips when Noah closed the distance between them, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with shared need. Ellie's arms wound around his neck, years of loneliness dissolving in the heat of their embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, wonder and desire mingled in their expressions. I never expected you, Noah murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Never imagined someone like you would come into our lives and change everything. Nor I you, she admitted. I came west, looking for security, for a practical arrangement. Not, she gestured between them, this. He smiled, the expression transforming his face. This is better though, isn't it? Much better, she agreed, returning his smile, though considerably more complicated. Life usually is. He kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. We should rest. Storm or no storm, we have a long journey. Ahead tomorrow. They arranged their blankets by the fire, lying side by side, close enough to share warmth but maintaining a modest distance that acknowledged the newness of their feelings, the delicacy of the trust growing between them. Ellie fell asleep to the rhythm of Noah's breathing beside her, the storm's fury outside no match for the peace she felt within. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape, the world reborn in pristine white. They set out early, determined to make up for the time lost to the storm. The air was crisp and clean, the sun glinting off the snow with dazzling brightness. They rode side by side when the trail allowed it, exchanging glances that spoke volumes, occasional touches that promised more. The remaining journey passed swiftly, the hardships of travel eased by their shared purpose and newfound connection. By the time they reached the county seat, a bustling town of brick buildings and busy streets, they had wordlessly agreed on a plan of action. Noah would present his case to the tax officials, while Ellie would seek out the regional newspaper editor, whose influence might help publicize the injustice being perpetrated. The county offices were imposing, designed to intimidate ordinary citizens with marble floors and high ceilings. Noah squared his shoulders as they entered, his hand finding the small of Ellie's back in a gesture both protective and seeking strength. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "thank you for coming with me, for believing in me." Ellie smiled up at him, confidence in her eyes. "They'll listen to us, and if they don't, we'll make them regret it." With that promise between them, they walked through the heavy doors, prepared to fight for Whispering Pines, and for the future they now dared to imagine together. The county clerk's office was a maze of bureaucracy, a deliberately confusing labyrinth designed to discourage ordinary citizens from pursuing justice. After 3 hours of being shuffled from one disinterested official to another, Noah's patience was wearing dangerously thin. Ellie could see the tension in the set of his jaw, the tightness around his eyes, as they were directed to yet another office, down yet another long hallway. "This is pointless," he muttered, as they waited on hard wooden benches outside the tax assessor's office. "They're stonewalling us deliberately." Ellie placed a calming hand on his arm, "which only proves they have something to hide. We need to remain composed, Noah. The moment we lose our tempers, they win." He exhaled slowly, some of the rigidity leaving his shoulders. "How did you get so wise?" he asked, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Experience," she replied simply. "I've dealt with officials intent on denying war widows their pensions, bureaucrats determined to block school funding. The tactics are always the same: delay, deflect, demoralize. And how do you counter such tactics? Persistence, documentation, and when necessary, a strategic appeal to a higher authority." She straightened her spine as the office door finally opened. "Follow my lead." The tax assessor, Mr. Jenkins, was a thin, balding man with spectacles that magnified his watery eyes to an unsettling degree. He barely looked up from his papers as they entered, gesturing impatiently for them to state their business. "We're here regarding a discrepancy with property taxes for Whispering Pines Ranch in Pine Ridge," Ellie began, her voice clear and confident. "Mr. Parker has evidence that his taxes were paid in full, yet the property has been erroneously listed for auction." Jenkins peered at them over his spectacles, his expression bored. "Evidence, you say? Well, let's see it then." Noah produced the receipt, slightly worn from being carried in his pocket, but still legible. Jenkins examined it with exaggerated thoroughness, turning it over several times as if expecting to find something hidden on the back. "This appears to be a receipt, yes," he said finally, "but it doesn't prove the county received the funds. You'd need the cancelled bank draft for that. Without it, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." "That's rather convenient," Ellie remarked, her tone pleasant, but with an edge of steel beneath. "Especially since the cancelled draft should have been returned to Mr. Parker by your office. We've checked with the bank. They confirmed the draft was cashed by the county treasurer." Jenkins' expression flickered briefly before settling back into practiced indifference. "Banks make mistakes. Documentation gets lost. Without the draft, the law is clear. The taxes are considered unpaid. And yet," Ellie continued smoothly, "Section 47 of the Territorial Tax Code specifically states that a properly issued receipt constitutes prima facie evidence of payment. Are you suggesting that an official county receipt is somehow invalid?" Jenkins blinked, clearly surprised by her knowledge of tax law. Well, that is to say, furthermore," she pressed her advantage, "we've taken the liberty of speaking with the editor of the Territorial Gazette. He finds it curious that several properties recently acquired by Caldwell Industries were similarly listed for tax auction, despite evidence of payment. He's quite interested in investigating further." This was a bluff. They hadn't yet spoken to the editor, but Jenkins had no way of knowing that. The mention of the newspaper had the desired effect. The assessor's composure cracked, a bead of sweat appearing on his forehead. "Now see here," he sputtered, "making accusations without proof is a serious matter. I simply enforce the tax code as written. If there's been some oversight regarding Mr. Parker's property, I'm sure it can be rectified." "Excellent," Ellie smiled. "We'd appreciate that oversight being rectified immediately, with written confirmation that Whispering Pines has been removed from the auction list." Jenkins hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to interrupt. When no rescue came, he reluctantly pulled a ledger from his desk and made a notation, then drafted a brief document stating that Noah's taxes had been verified as paid in full. "This should resolve the matter," he said stiffly, pushing the paper across the desk. "Though I must say, Mrs. Parker, your understanding of tax law is unusual for a rancher's wife." "Miss Mitchell," Ellie corrected, accepting the document. "And I make it a point to understand matters that affect those I care about." Outside the county building, Noah's relief was palpable. He pulled Ellie into a tight embrace, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "I would have lost my temper in the first 5 minutes without you." Ellie laughed, her face pressed against his chest. "You held your own admirably, and your glowering presence certainly helped intimidate Jenkins." He released her reluctantly, though his hand remained at the small of her back as they walked toward the hotel where they'd taken rooms for the night. "What you said about the newspaper editor, was that true?" "Not yet," she admitted. "But it will be by nightfall. We need to ensure this story reaches the right ears. Caldwell clearly has influence beyond Pine Ridge, and exposing his methods publicly may be our best protection." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, but it will make him dangerous. Men like Caldwell don't take kindly to having their schemes revealed. All the more reason to have witnesses and documentation. The more people who know what he's doing, the harder it will be for him to continue." Ellie's expression grew serious. "But you're right to be cautious. We should head back to Whispering Pines tomorrow, make sure Ethan is safe." The mention of his son sobered Noah further. "God, I hope Frank's keeping a close watch. If Caldwell would stoop to tax fraud, there's no telling what else he might try." They spent the remainder of the day securing their victory, meeting with the newspaper editor, filing certified copies of the tax clearance with both the county and territorial offices, and sending a telegram to Frank letting him know they would begin the journey home the following morning. The ride back to Pine Ridge was considerably faster than their outbound journey. The weather held clear and cold, allowing them to make good time along trails now packed with well-traveled snow. They spoke little as they rode, both preoccupied with thoughts of what awaited them at Whispering Pines and what their future might hold. On the evening of their second day of travel, they made camp in a sheltered grove near a frozen stream. As Ellie prepared their simple meal, Noah tended the horses, his movements efficient but distracted. When he finally joined her by the fire, his expression was troubled. "What is it?" she asked, handing him a tin cup of hot coffee. Noah stared into the flames. "I've been thinking about what happens next, about us." Ellie's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I want you to stay." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Not as a guest or hired help, but as more, much more. Noah." "Let me finish," he said gently. "I know this isn't what you came west for. You expected a proper courtship, a respectable marriage, not a widower with a struggling ranch and a 9-year-old boy. You make it sound like a poor bargain," she said, a small smile playing at her lips, "when in fact it's everything I could want." Hope flared in his eyes. "Is it? Truly?" "Yes." The simplicity of her answer seemed to take him by surprise. I love Ethan as if he were my own. I love Whispering Pines with all its challenges and beauty. And I love you, Noah Parker. Not despite your struggles and scars, but because of the man they've shaped you into." Noah set aside his coffee cup and moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I never thought I'd love again after Rebecca died. Never imagined there could be room in my heart for another woman. But you, Eleanor Mitchell, have taught me otherwise." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A simple ring carved from dark wood, polished to a soft glow. "I made this while you were sleeping last night. It's not gold or silver, not worthy of the woman you are, but it's a promise if you'll have it. A promise that as soon as we return home, I'll go to Pine Ridge and buy you a proper ring, speak, and to the minister, do everything right." Tears blurred Ellie's vision as she extended her hand, allowing Noah to slip the wooden ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. "And yes, 1,000 times yes, I'll have it. Have you. Have the life we'll build together." He rose then, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was deep and tender, a seal on promises spoken and unspoken. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "Mrs. Eleanor Parker," Noah said, testing the sound of it, "has a fine ring to it, don't you think?" "Indeed it does," she agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Though I suspect certain residents of Pine Ridge will have rather different opinions on the matter." Noah's expression hardened slightly. "Let them talk. You've more than proven your worth. To me, to Ethan, to anyone with eyes to see and sense, to recognize quality when they see it." They held each other close as the fire burned low, the future suddenly bright with possibility, despite the challenges they knew awaited them. Whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer alone, no longer adrift, but anchored in a love neither had expected to find. The final day of their journey dawned bitter cold, but clear. The winter sun casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. They rode steadily, eager to reach Whispering Pines before nightfall. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley, Ellie felt a surge of homecoming so powerful it momentarily took her breath away. The small cluster of buildings nestled among the pines already felt more like home than anywhere she had lived in years. But as they drew closer, Noah suddenly reined his horse to a halt, his posture tensing. "Something's wrong." Ellie followed his gaze and saw it too. No smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and the yard, which should have shown signs of daily activity, lay untouched beneath its blanket of snow. "Maybe they're in town," she suggested, fighting down a rising sense of alarm. "Or visiting Betty." Noah shook his head, already urging his horse forward at a faster pace. Frank would have left tracks, and he wouldn't leave the livestock untended. They approached cautiously, Noah's hand resting on the rifle slung across his saddle. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their horses' hooves and the occasional creak of leather. As they reached the yard, Ellie's eyes were drawn to the barn door, hanging askew on its hinges as if it had been forced open. Noah dismounted in one fluid motion, drawing his rifle as his feet hit the ground. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and tense. "I will not," Ellie replied firmly, sliding from her own horse. "We face this together, remember?" A conflict played across his features, the instinct to protect warring with the recognition of her courage and capability. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind me then, and if I tell you to run, you run, no arguments." They approached the barn first, Noah leading with his rifle ready. Inside, they found evidence of a struggle. Scattered hay, overturned buckets, a smear of what might have been blood on one of the stall doors. The horses were gone, including Ethan's beloved pony, Major. "The cabin," Noah said grimly, already moving toward the house. The front door stood partially open, swinging gently in the cold breeze. Noah pushed it wider with the barrel of his rifle, then stepped cautiously over the threshold. Ellie followed close behind, her heart pounding in her ears. The interior of the cabin was in disarray. Chairs overturned, cupboard doors hanging open, bedding torn from the beds. But it was the message scrawled across the main room's wall that made Noah's breath hiss between his teeth. Caldwell sends. His regards, Ethan, Noah whispered, his voice raw with fear. Frank. Noah, look! Ellie pointed to a piece of paper pinned to the table with a hunting knife. Noah crossed the room in 2 strides, yanking the knife free and scanning the note. With growing horror. What does it say? Ellie asked, though part of her didn't want to know. They've taken Ethan. Noah's voice was hollow, empty of everything but shock. Caldwell's men. It says if I want to see him alive again, I need to sign over the deed to Whispering Pines. I'm to come alone to Caldwell's ranch tomorrow at noon. Or what about Frank? Noah shook his head. Nothing. Just says Ethan is unharmed for now, but that could change if I don't cooperate or if I involve the sheriff. Ellie's mind raced, fear for Ethan warring with the need to think clearly. This is kidnapping. Even Caldwell can't be so brazen. Surely the law in these parts is whatever Caldwell says it is. Noah cut in bitterly. You saw how easily he manipulated the county officials. Sheriff Lawson is firmly in his pocket. And now he has my son. He slammed his fist against the wall, the sudden violence making Ellie jump. I'll kill him, Noah growled. If he's harmed one hair on Ethan's head, I swear to God I'll kill him with my bare hands. And get yourself killed in the process, Ellie countered, forcing calm into her voice. Which helps no one, least of all Ethan. We need to think, Noah. Plan. There's nothing to plan. I'll give him what he wants. The ranch, everything. None of it matters compared to Ethan's safety. And then what? Ellie asked. You think Caldwell will just let you walk away? Let you tell others what he's done? He's shown his true colors now, Noah. There's no going back for him. Once you sign that deed, what's to stop him from eliminating all witnesses? The blood drained from Noah's face as he absorbed the implication of her words. You think he means to kill us regardless? I think a man who would kidnap a child is capable of anything. Ellie took a deep breath, steadying herself. But he doesn't know we're back yet. He doesn't know we're aware of what's happened. That gives us an advantage. Noah stared at her, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. What are you suggesting? That we don't play by his rules, that we find out where they're holding Ethan and get him back before the meeting tomorrow, and that we gather allies, people, who still believe in justice even if the sheriff doesn't, who, half the town fears Caldwell, the other half works for him. Ellie thought quickly. Frank has friends, the Blacksmith's Guild, the miners from the North Ridge. Betty must know people too. And what about the native settlement beyond Thunder Creek? You mentioned the chief respects you after you helped his son last winter. Chief Broken Arrow, Noah nodded slowly. Yes, he has no love for Caldwell after the mining company polluted their fishing grounds, but asking others to risk themselves against Caldwell's men. We're not asking them to fight our battles, Ellie said firmly. Just to stand with us, to bear witness. Caldwell thrives in shadows, Noah. Let's bring his actions into the light. A new determination replaced the despair in Noah's expression. You're right. And the first step is finding Ethan. They won't keep him at the main ranch house. Too many people coming and going. It would have to be somewhere isolated, somewhere they could guard easily. The old mining office, Ellie suggested, remembering. Conversations from town. The one at the edge of Caldwell's property. I overheard men at the general store saying he uses it for private business, away from prying eyes. It's as good a guess as any, Noah agreed. But we need to be sure. If we strike in the wrong place, we'll lose our only chance. Ellie considered the problem. Betty might know. Frank would have told her what happened if he could. We should start there. They searched the cabin thoroughly for any further clues, but found nothing. The horse tracks leading from the barn were several days old, obscured by the recent snowfall. As darkness approached, they decided to risk visiting Betty Wilson's home on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. The widow's small house was dark when they arrived, setting alarm bells ringing in both their minds. Betty was known for keeping late hours, her lamp often burning well into the night as she worked on her sewing. "Something's wrong," Noah whispered as they approached on foot, having left their horses tethered in a copse of trees a quarter-mile back. "Betty never retires this early." They circled the house cautiously, peering through windows into darkened rooms. When they reached the back door, they found it slightly ajar, a faint moaning sound coming from within. Noah pushed the door open, rifle raised, while Ellie held a small lantern aloft. The sight that greeted them made Ellie gasp in horror. Betty lay on the floor near the stove, her grey hair matted with blood, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Nearby, slumped against the wall, was Frank, his broad chest rising and falling in labored breaths, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Dear God," Noah breathed, rushing to his friend's side while Ellie knelt beside Betty. "The old woman's alive," Ellie reported, her fingers finding a pulse at Betty's neck. "But she needs a doctor urgently." Frank's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices. "Noah," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "That you?" "I'm here, old friend," Noah assured him, gripping his hand. "What happened? Where's Ethan?" "Caldwell's men," Frank managed, each word clearly causing him pain. "6 of them came for the boy. I fought and couldn't stop them. Betty tried to help. They struck her down." "Ethan," Noah pressed urgently. "Is he hurt?" Frank shook his head weakly. "No. Scared but unharmed when they took him. Said they'd keep him that way if you cooperated." "Where did they take him, Frank? Do you know?" "Heard them mention the old mine office." Frank's eyes were losing focus, his strength clearly failing. "Said no one would find him there." Ellie moved to examine Frank's wound, gently pulling aside his blood-soaked shirt. She inhaled sharply at what she found, a deep knife wound in his abdomen, the kind that rarely healed without proper medical attention. "We need to get them both to a doctor," she said quietly to Noah. "Immediately." "No time," Frank coughed. "Go get your boy, Noah. We'll manage." "You're not managing anything with that wound," Ellie said firmly. "And neither is Betty with a head injury." Noah looked torn, the need to find his son warring with loyalty to his injured friends. Ellie made the decision for him. "We'll take them to Doc Morrison in town," she said. "He's no friend of Caldwell's, lost his daughter to the mining company's negligence last year. He'll help without alerting the sheriff." "And then?" Noah asked, already moving to gently lift Betty. "Then we gather what allies we can and head. And for the mine office." Ellie's voice was steel and silk, determined yet calm. "We'll get Ethan back, Noah. Tonight, before Caldwell can set his trap tomorrow." They worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift stretcher for Frank from a blanket and 2 broom handles while carrying Betty wrapped in quilts. The journey to town was slow and agonizing. Every jolt of the stretcher drawing pained groans from Frank, despite his stoic attempts to remain silent. Doc Morrison's house sat on the far edge of Pine Ridge, a modest structure with a small sign identifying it as both home and medical office. The elderly physician answered their knock immediately, his lined face grave as he took in the injured, patients and their desperate escorts. "Bring them in," he said without hesitation, holding the door wide. "Betty first. Head wounds are unpredictable." They laid the unconscious woman on the examination table, while Morrison quickly assessed. "Her injuries? Concussion, certainly, possibly a skull fracture, and that arm is broken in at least 2 places." He turned to Frank on the stretcher. "And this?" "Knife wound," Ellie explained. "Deep abdominal. He's lost a lot of blood." Morrison nodded grimly. I'll do what I can. You two look like you have somewhere else to be. My son, Noah said simply. Caldwell's men have him. The doctor's expression hardened. That man has brought nothing but suffering to this valley. Go. I'll tend to your friends. But be careful. Caldwell doesn't leave witnesses to his crimes. We don't intend to give him a choice, Ellie replied, a fierce determination in her voice that seemed to surprise Morrison. You remind me of my Clara, the doctor said softly. Same fire in your eyes. She wouldn't back down from Caldwell either, even when they threatened her. He reached into a cabinet and withdrew a small revolver, offering it to Ellie. Take this, it was hers. She'd want it used to protect a child. Ellie accepted the weapon with solemn reverence. Thank you. We'll return it safely, and with your friends. See that you do, Morrison replied. And if you need more help, try Jacob Redstone at the livery. His brother worked the mines until Caldwell's foreman left him to die in a cave-in. He's no friend of Victor Caldwell. With this new information, Noah and Ellie slipped back into the night, moving carefully through the shadows of Pine Ridge toward the livery stable. Jacob Redstone proved to be a taciturn man with hard eyes and a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. But at the mention of Ethan's kidnapping, something in his expression shifted from suspicion to resolve. The mine office, you say? Redstone. Confirmed, already reaching for his coat and rifle. I know it well. Worked there before Caldwell took over the operation. There's a back entrance through the old supply tunnel that his men might not know about. How many men can you gather? Noah asked. We need enough to overwhelm any guards, but not so many that we alert the entire valley. Redstone considered this. 5, maybe 6. Good men who know how to keep quiet and handle themselves in a fight. Give me an hour. That hour was the longest of Ellie's life, each minute stretching endlessly as she imagined Ethan's fear, his confusion at being separated from those he loved. She and Noah waited in the back room of the livery, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. I should never have left him, Noah said suddenly, breaking the silence. Should have taken him with us, or stayed behind myself. You couldn't have known Caldwell would stoop so low, Ellie replied gently, and Frank was capable protection against any normal threat. If anything happens to Ethan, it won't. She took his hand, squeezing it firmly. He's a resourceful boy, Noah, stronger than you give him credit for, and will be there soon. Noah's fingers intertwined with hers, drawing strength from her conviction. When this is over, if we all come through it safely, I want us to be married right away. No waiting, no long engagement. Life's too uncertain, too precious to delay. Happiness when you find it. I want that too, Ellie assured him, though I suspect it will scandalize Pine Ridge thoroughly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Let them talk. After tonight, I doubt Caldwell's opinion will carry much weight. Anyway. True to his word, Redstone returned within the hour, accompanied by 5 grim-faced men armed with rifles and determination. They gathered around a rough map of the mine office and surrounding terrain that Redstone had sketched, planning their approach with the precision of men who understood the stakes. 2 guards outside, most likely, Redstone explained. Another, 2 inside with the boy. If Caldwell's following his usual pattern, Harris and Malone will take the guards silently while the rest of us enter through the supply tunnel, quick and quiet. We want to secure the boy before anyone raises the alarm. The plan was simple, but sound. As they prepared to move out, Ellie found herself checking Clara Morrison's revolver one final time, the weight of it unfamiliar but necessary. She had not fired a gun since the war, had hoped never to need such skills again. But for Ethan, for the family they were building, she would do whatever was required. Stay close to me, Noah murmured as they set out, a small band of shadows moving through the moonlit night. And if anything goes wrong... Nothing will go wrong, she interrupted with quiet confidence. We're bringing Ethan home tonight. All of us together. The old mine office loomed ahead, a squat, dark structure against the silver landscape. As they approached from the rear, Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, prayer and determination mingling with each breath. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. For Ethan, for Noah, for the future they had only just begun to imagine together, she would face whatever dangers the night might hold. And when dawn broke over whispering pines, she vowed silently, it would find them all home, safe in each other's arms. The nightmare of Caldwell's greed and cruelty behind them at last. The mine office stood silent against the backdrop of snow-covered pines, its weathered wooden structure barely visible in the moonlight. As Noah and Ellie approached with Redstone and his men, they could make out two guards stationed at the front entrance, rifles propped against their shoulders as they stamped their feet against the cold. "Remember the plan," Redstone whispered, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Harris, Malone, take the guards. The rest of us circle around to the supply tunnel. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. The boys' safety comes first." Noah's hand found Ellie's in the darkness, squeezing it briefly before releasing. No words were needed. The gesture conveyed everything: fear, determination, and the promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. They separated, moving like shadows across the open ground between the trees and the mine office. Ellie followed Noah and Redstone around the back of the building to a half-concealed entrance, its wooden supports partially collapsed with age and neglect. Redstone held up a hand, signaling them to wait as they listened for the signal that the front guards had been neutralized. A soft owl hoot 3 times in quick succession broke the silence. "Now," Redstone mouthed, leading them into the darkness of the tunnel. The passageway was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting timber. Ellie's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the men ahead must hear it. Her fingers tightened around Clara Morrison's revolver, the metal cold against her palm. The tunnel ended at a trapdoor set into the ceiling. Redstone paused beneath it, listening intently before nodding to Noah. Together, they eased the wooden panel upward, allowing a sliver of lamplight to spill into the passage. Voices drifted down from above, 2 men, their conversation casual and unconcerned. "Caldwell said midnight tomorrow. Don't see why we gotta sit here with the brat all night." "Orders are orders. Besides, better than riding patrol in this cold." "Kid's a nuisance, though. Keeps asking about his pa and that woman." Noah's jaw tightened at the mention of Ethan. Redstone placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, urging patience. The men above continued their conversation, unaware of the rescue party beneath their feet. "You think Caldwell will actually let the rancher go once he signs over the deed?" A harsh laugh. "What do you think? Can't leave witnesses, especially now that he's taken the kid. That crosses a line, and Caldwell knows it." "What about the boy?" A pause. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." The implication hung in the air, confirming Ellie's worst fears. Caldwell never intended to release Ethan, regardless of whether Noah cooperated. The knowledge steeled her resolve. This wasn't just about saving a ranch anymore. It was about saving a child's life. Redstone caught Noah's eye, indicating it was time to move. He signaled to the other men, positioning them around the trapdoor. Then, with a decisive nod, he pushed it fully open, and they surged upward into the room. The guards were caught completely off guard, one halfway through a drink of coffee, the other slouched in a chair with his feet propped up on a desk. Before either could react, Redstone and his men had them subdued, weapons confiscated, and mouths gagged with strips of cloth. Ellie scanned the room frantically, her heart dropping when she saw no sign of Ethan. "Where is he?" she demanded, approaching one of the bound guards. "The boy! Where are you keeping him?" The man's eyes darted toward a closed door at the far end of the room. Noah moved toward it immediately, but Redstone cautioned him to wait, checking first for additional guards. Finding none, he nodded, and Noah flung the door open. Inside the small office, huddled in a corner on a narrow cot, was Ethan. The boy's face was tear-streaked but otherwise unmarked, his clothes rumpled, but intact. He looked up at the sound of the door opening, his expression transforming from fear to disbelieving joy. "Pa!" he cried, launching himself across the room into Noah's waiting arms. Noah caught him, holding him tight against his chest, as if he might never let go. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, running his hands over the boy's head and shoulders. "Did they harm you?" Ethan shook his head, tears flowing freely now. "They scared me, Pa. Said you weren't coming back, that you'd abandoned me. Never," Noah vowed fiercely. "I will never abandon you, son. Never." Ellie approached them slowly, her own vision blurred with tears of relief. When Ethan saw her, he broke from his father's embrace to throw his arms around her waist. "Ellie, you came too." "Of course I did," she said softly, stroking his tousled hair. "We both came for you. We always will." Their reunion was cut short by Redstone's urgent whisper from the doorway. "We need to move. Patrol's due to check in soon. When they don't report, Caldwell will know something's wrong." Noah nodded, keeping one arm around Ethan as they moved back into the main room. The guards were now securely bound and gagged, watching with impotent fury as their prisoner was freed. "The supply tunnel?" Noah asked, already guiding Ethan toward the trapdoor. Redstone shook his head. "Too risky. They might have men watching it by now. We'll go out the front, same way Harris and Malone came in, quick and quiet." They moved as one unit through the mine office, stepping out into the cold night air where Harris and Malone waited with the subdued front guards. Ethan clung to Noah's hand, his other hand firmly gripping Ellie's, forming a chain that none of them were willing to break. The journey back to Pine Ridge was tense, but uneventful, each cracking twig and rustling leaf setting nerves on edge. They made straight for Doc Morrison's house, where Frank and Betty were being treated. The elderly physician answered their knock, relief washing over his lined face at the sight of Ethan. "Thank God," he murmured, ushering them inside. "The boy's unharmed." "Scared but whole," Noah confirmed. "Frank? Betty?" "Stable, both of them. Betty's conscious now, though confused. Frank's lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. Should pull through with proper care." Ethan broke away to stand beside Frank's cot, his small hand reaching out to touch the blacksmith's much larger one. "Mr. Wilson saved me," he said solemnly. "When they came, he fought them all. Told me to run, but I couldn't get away fast enough." Frank's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the boy's voice. "Ethan," he whispered hoarsely, "you're safe." "Thanks to you," Noah said, moving to stand beside his son. "We're forever in your debt, old friend." Frank managed a weak smile. "No debt between friends. Just get Caldwell. Make him pay." "We will," Redstone promised from the doorway. "But not tonight. Tonight we get everyone to safety. Tomorrow we deal with Caldwell." The plan came together quickly. The rescued Ethan could not return to Whispering Pines. That would be the first place Caldwell's men would look once they discovered their prisoner missing. Instead, Redstone suggested taking the boy and Ellie to his sister's homestead in the high country, a remote cabin known to few and accessible only by a treacherous mountain trail. "What about you?" Ellie asked Noah, already anticipating his answer. "I'll stay in town. When Caldwell sends word demanding I meet him, I'll go, with Redstone and every other man we can gather who's suffered at his hands. It's time he answered for his crimes publicly and permanently." Ellie wanted to argue, to insist they stay together, but she understood the logic. Ethan's safety had to come first, and Noah needed to end Caldwell's threat once and for all if they were ever to live in peace. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Promise me you'll come back to us." Noah's gaze was steady, resolute. I promise. And when I do, we'll be married right away, just as we discussed. No more waiting." "No more waiting," she agreed, sealing the promise with a brief, fierce kiss. Dawn was breaking as Ellie and Ethan set out with Redstone's younger brother as their guide. The boy was exhausted, but refused to complain. His father's courage reflected in his determined little face. As they rode into the mountains, Ellie glanced back one last time at Pine Ridge, sending up a silent prayer for Noah's safety and success. The high country cabin was snug and well-provisioned, with thick walls to keep out the bitter cold and a stone fireplace that soon had the interior warm and cozy. Ethan fell asleep almost immediately upon arrival, the ordeal of his captivity finally catching up with him. Ellie sat beside his bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, marveling at the depth of love she felt for this child who had so unexpectedly become hers. The day passed with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching endlessly as Ellie waited for news from town. She kept busy, preparing meals, telling Ethan stories, checking and rechecking the rifle Redstone's brother had left for their protection. But beneath the calm exterior, her mind churned with worry and fear for Noah. It was nearly dusk when they heard the approach of horses. Ellie positioned herself at the window, rifle ready, while Ethan hid beneath the bed as instructed. The approaching rider came into view, a lone figure on a familiar horse. "It's Pa!" Ethan cried, abandoning his hiding place to rush toward the door. Ellie caught him before he could fling it open. "Wait," she cautioned, "let's be sure." But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Noah's broad shoulders, his distinctive way of sitting in the saddle. And he was alone. No pursuers, no signs of injury or distress. She set aside the rifle and opened the door, Ethan breaking free to run toward his father. Noah dismounted in one fluid motion, catching his son and swinging him up into his arms. The joy on his face told Ellie everything she needed to know, even before he reached her. "It's over," he said simply. "Caldwell is finished." Later, after Ethan had been tucked into bed with promises of returning home tomorrow, Noah and Ellie sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders as he recounted the day's events. "Caldwell was shocked when I showed up at his ranch with Redstone and 20 other men instead of coming alone as instructed. Even more shocked when Sheriff Lawson arrived with them." "Lawson?" Ellie asked incredulously. "I thought he was in Caldwell's pocket." "He was," Noah confirmed, "until Doc Morrison showed him Frank and Betty's injuries, and we presented proof of Ethan's kidnapping. Seems even Lawson has limits to what he'll tolerate. Kidnapping a child crossed the line. What happened to Caldwell?" "Under arrest, along with his hired guns. The territorial marshal's been summoned. Between the tax fraud, the kidnapping, the assault on Frank and Betty, and a dozen other charges the townspeople suddenly found courage to bring forward. He'll hang or spend the rest of his life in prison." Ellie leaned into Noah's embrace, relief washing over her in waves. "And Whispering Pines? Still ours?" He kissed the top of her head. "Ours, Ellie, if you still want it." She tilted her face up to his, love shining in her eyes. "More than anything, it's home now, you, me, and Ethan, together." Noah's expression grew serious, though his eyes remained tender. "There's something else." News traveled fast once Caldwell was arrested. By noon, half the territory knew the story, including how a mail-order bride helped save a kidnapped boy and bring down the most powerful man in the valley. "Oh dear," Ellie chuckled softly. "I imagine that caused quite a stir." "It did, but not in the way you might think." Noah reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This came for you, from the town council. It seems Pine Ridge is in need of a schoolteacher, and they've heard you have experience." Ellie unfolded the letter with trembling fingers, reading the formal offer of employment to Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, soon to be Parker. The salary was generous, the terms respectful. They want me to teach after everything that's happened. They want you because of everything that's happened, Noah corrected gently. You've earned their respect, Ellie. Not that you needed it, but you have it nonetheless. Tears welled in her eyes as the full import of the day's events washed over her. Not only had they saved Ethan and defeated Caldwell, but she had found acceptance in this community that had once mocked and rejected her. More importantly, she had found a family, a purpose, a home. What do you think? Noah asked, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Will you accept their offer? Yes, she whispered. Yes to the teaching position, and yes to everything else. To Whispering Pines, to being Ethan's mother, to being your wife. Yes to the life we'll build together. Noah's kiss was tender, a promise of the future they would share. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, no longer a lonely sound, but a sweet accompaniment to the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places, between the most unlikely of people. For Eleanor Mitchell, once laughed out of town for being too old to be a bride, had found not just a husband but a family, not just a home but a community. And in doing so, she had taught them all that love recognizes no boundaries of age or circumstance, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings emerge from the most difficult of journeys. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.